Welcome to the GBTA Mid-Year Virtual Summit and Annual Business Meeting. This session is Evolution, SMM Considerations in an Almost Post-Pandemic Environment. A couple of housekeeping items. Registrants, microphones, and videos will not be enabled. Please place your questions in the Q&A box. If there is time, these will be answered after the webinar. Please make sure also to visit our event hub. The web address is right there. Keep that handy. This is how you'll maneuver between the different sessions. This is your gateway again to all the different sessions today. I'd like to introduce our speakers for this amazing panel. We've got Betsy Bondurant, President of Bondurant Consulting. Welcome, Betsy. We have Julie Haddix, our Senior Director of Industry Solutions at Cvent. Welcome, Julie. And we've got Nick Pupa, Category Manager at DSM. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Natasha. We appreciate the introduction. So happy to be here with my panelists. I have actually been in the industry my entire career on the corporate side with a pioneering SMM and been lucky enough to be doing consulting for the last 14 years with dozens of multinational companies in many different categories. So it gives me a really interesting perspective. Julie.
Yes, thank you, Betsy. I've been with Cvent now for over 14 years, and for much of that time, been working on our approach to strategic meetings management, both in the sales side of things, as well as now in our product marketing group, where I do all of our industry research on the latest trends we're seeing and work on how to then take those trends and leverage them to implement our software.
And good morning, everyone. I'm Nick Pupa. I'm a procurement category manager at DSM. And I'm also the chair of the GBTA Meetings and Events Committee. So a pleasure to be here this morning. I've been part of our travel and SMM program for the last, 7 or 8 years. And SMM is near and dear to my heart. And it's been fun to build an SMM program at DSM from the ground up, working with great partners like Betsy and Julie. So thanks for having me this morning.
Terrific. And thanks for mentioning the Meetings and Events Committee for GBTA. You're a fearless leader. Thank you for that. And I think almost is a key word for our conversation today, almost post-pandemic. And I really wanted to do a shout out to GBTA and Cvent. They do an annual study, and this information, some of the information from that study is what's driving our conversation today. So, you can see here that, we've got in-person, hybrid, and virtual meetings is going to be part of our future for the long term. And actually, Julie, if I could ask you to share some of the methodology that was used for this study, I think that would be helpful.
Absolutely. Thanks, Betsy. Yep. So it was a fun survey to do because we kept trying to figure out the right timing for this survey. But ultimately, we did end up deploying the survey at the end of 2020 to really just look at what were the trends and impacts of the global pandemic on the perception of meetings and events and the industry. And we had responses from over 100 people across various sectors of business to give us these insights that we'll be sharing with you guys today.
Terrific. And Nick, I know you've got perspective on this center in our Venn diagram here about hybrid meetings. Can you share that?
Yeah, and just I think an interesting anecdote is about a year ago, I was one of the loudest voices saying that that hybrid was going to be the future. And I'm still in that camp, but I do think that the trends are showing some different things. And when we talk about hybrid, I do think it's here to stay for key events, tier 1 events. But I do think we're starting to see a resurgence back to face-to-face for our simpler and maybe more regional events, which is very interesting. And I think one of our taglines you'll see at the end of this discussion is that face-to-face is here to stay. And I think the dynamics will change over time, but I think that's a very interesting change, at least in my perception.
And I will reinforce that I've been hearing that very recently from a lot of my clients and industry colleagues as well. So if we can move on to the next slide. So, this really does kind of reinforce the fact that face-to-face is here to stay. Right. And I don't know, Julie, if you want to add some more context to this.
Absolutely, Betsy. So, I feel like this really shows that the headline is the key takeaway, but there was a lot of skepticism in moving to virtual in a lot of different areas, and people were wondering, would you be able to get that engagement and get the results that you needed? And it's great to see that people did get more of the results out of their virtual meetings and events than maybe some people were worried that they would. But I think everybody's also really happy to see that virtual is not going to replace that in-person connection that we all love, that business travel, business meetings and events will come back. But it will be interesting to see, where does virtual stay? Because you do have types of events that maybe really were successful virtually, and there are a lot of reasons that those virtual events might have a place to stay in meeting and event programs. And that now we're really seeing that Venn diagram from the last slide, your total event program, as you think about the future, is not just about in-person events. It's not just about virtual events. It's not just about hybrid events, but it's how do you have a total program that merges all three of those, that based on your different types of events, you have your in-person, you have your virtual, and you have your hybrid to meet your different business goals and objectives.
Yeah, Nick, do you want to build on that? Because I know that a while back you were talking about a decision matrix of some sort.
Yeah, I think that's really, the fundamental, aspect of SMM, which is why do we have meetings, and what's the goal of a meeting or an event, and really starting to drive the discussion back to those fundamentals. If the meeting or event is something simple, if it's a team meeting, if it's something that happens on a recurring basis, I think there's no reason that it can't stay virtual. And then, when we talk about hybrid, if you've got events in an almost post-pandemic world where there's still restrictions in place for people to travel, whether it's from a government and travel perspective, or whether it's more of a corporate strategy or, well-being perspective, hybrid may be the best solution, whether it's with hubs, where you've got folks in regions or countries coming face-to-face and then joining their global counterparts via a virtual event. Or, if it's one of those, if it's a critical strategic meeting, why not have it face-to-face? Because we know the value of face-to-face and what it can deliver in a very short period of time. So I think there's definitely a reason to go back to the fundamentals of SMM and really justifying why a meeting is taking place, and then having the data after the fact to validate it.
Yeah, all really good points. And let me ask you, Nick, you're responsible for travel as well. Will this drive changes in your travel policy?
Absolutely. So we're working on that at the moment. Hopefully in the next couple of weeks, we'll be rolling out some new, I would say, really cool things that are really focusing on three pillars. The two most important of which I would say are sustainability and well-being of the traveler. So I think what one of the discussions around hybrid is going to be, what's the impact on the traveler, the employee, and are we talking about their well-being? And if we're really focusing on well-being, we know that the cost of traveling to an event is going to increase by nature around that. So that's back to, I guess, my point around justification for an event. And then on the sustainability side, as Julie said, we do know that we can do some things virtually if there's not a hard requirement to be face-to-face. And that can, just continue to move us forward in that discussion around reducing our footprint on a global basis.
Yeah, really interesting. And I have to say, one of the things we learned from being locked down is that, maybe we don't need to spend that 8 hours on a flight to go to London for a 6-hour meeting, which I have done. So, and the 2 points that you bring up are very, very valid. It's not simply, the time and wear and tear on me, but for the planet. I mean, the carbon footprint of that. So it'll be really interesting to see, how short or long term of a memory we have as an industry. And also we want all of our partners to be successful, right? We don't want the airlines to go out of business. We want our hotels to be full and occupied and doing well. So it's an interesting balance.
I will say on that sustainability point, it's been really interesting that pre-pandemic, our European teams were on us all the time to talk about sustainability and the importance of sustainability. And, those of us in the US were like, yeah, we understand, like, okay, European, you run with that. But now coming out of the pandemic, to Nick's point, we're hearing it from so many different customers. I'm hearing it in so many different areas of the industry that this impact of sustainability and the ability to do virtual long term because of the sustainability initiatives is something that has really been an outcome that I don't see many anticipated. And it's a really interesting outcome that I think we're going to see a lot of businesses apply to their meetings and events.
Yeah, I think a lot more businesses are being very vocal about their carbon neutral or whatever their particular neutrality goals are.
Yeah.
And I think they're publishing those, so that we'll really pay attention to that. And it's something that they're going to make sure they achieve. So let's move on to the next slide. And so that being said, as it relates to our hybrid meetings really going to be around, but yeah, I mean, people are certainly a lot more interested in hybrid meetings. And let's talk about that, Nick, from your perspective, the P word, right? The pivot. How did you help your internal clients make that pivot from, overnight, right? From the face-to-face meetings to the 100% virtual. And then we can talk about how that rolls into hybrid in the future.
Yeah, so we were very fortunate to be able to pivot very quickly at the very beginning of lockdowns and be able to keep our SMM going and continue to help our stakeholders facilitate, I would say, complex meetings. I don't want to use the word lucky, but I do think a lot of discussion around luck is around preparedness. We're in the process of changing some partners and some processes. And it just so happened that one of our new partners was able to deliver, a solution that was ideal for us. So that, along with the mix of our other technologies that were in place, enabled us to very quickly pivot to pure virtual and deliver, whether it was our Capital Markets Day, our high-end global executive meetings, or just some customer-facing events as well. I will say our SMM is very heavily focused on internal meetings just because of the nature of our company. But it also enabled us to do more customer-facing meetings than we may have done historically. So that was a really cool additional benefit to our pivot.
So what was it that you were looking for, or that you had prepared and got your new supplier? What was the offering that they had that was such a good match for DSM?
So I think it was a bolt-on. So it didn't consume or overtake the rest of our SMM, right? It was something that we were able to plug in and make the face or hybrid component. It enabled us to have the best of both worlds. So it was we call it a virtual venue. And what we've seen over the last year is there's dozens and dozens of companies out there that have deployed similar technology. The nice thing about the one that we deployed with our partner Prosky is that it really fit our program in terms of scale, and also the ability to integrate with our other technologies such as Cvent and some of the other webinar tooling that we use.
Interesting. And a final question on that is, what kind of training? How did you let people know? I think delivering a meeting in a virtual environment is so much different than a live environment. What were some of the tips and tricks that you told your executives when they needed to make this transition?
So back to the luck statement, our first event that we did or in that venue was with our top executives. So they got to see and believe right up front. And so it was very easy to turn them into advocates once we'd had some success there, including communication around our program as well as the new technologies in place to the employee base at large. So we we could have asked for a better scenario in a I would say a very challenging environment.
And I think you touched on something that I've heard from a lot of people is that don't waste a good pandemic, right? Is that, SMM programs have really come front and center for a lot of organizations because of what you said. The SMM leaders who really embraced the virtual technology and understood that they had to drive that forward really were able to get that many more seats at the table.
Yeah, absolutely.
Huge. Julie, what are you seeing from your perspective? You're a technology company, and you certainly help counsel a lot of people.
Yeah, so something that Nick said really jumped at me, and that was the term the virtual venue, because that's something we're really seeing, and that the shift to virtual in the pandemic, these virtual hubs, Cvent pivoted, B word, came out with our own virtual attendee hub during the pandemic, but across the board, whatever virtual technology you're using, we're really seeing that technology is becoming that venue. And one of the things that I really see even coming forward in this recovery mode is that technology is going to continue to be a key venue for your event, especially as you think about hybrid events, because the technology is what creates that shared experience between your in-person attendees and your virtual experience attendees. And when you think about, in our research, we showed that 64% of people are interested in doing hybrid. But when you think about doing hybrid events in a post-pandemic world, your virtual attendees are going to remember the engagement that you had at a virtual event. They're going to remember the ability to do polling, to interact with the speakers, to have a virtual community. And they're not going to be satisfied to go back to the hybrid events of the pre-pandemic where you put a camera in the back of the room and streamed and had a voyeuristic experience of watching, maybe it was the camera from above the clouds as a speaker walked back and forth, and all you did was have odd camera angles to hear what was saying being said in real time. There's so much more opportunities now going into the future for hybrid events to create that shared experience through technology and really embracing technology systems that can create connection between your virtual and in-person attendees if you are doing a hybrid event. So that's something we're definitely seeing. But we're also then seeing that for hybrid, there's not a one size fits all, that hybrid events really do come on a scale, and that you really need to think about what is your goal of your event and why do you want it to be hybrid. Because to the point that some events might be virtual, some might be in person, some might be hybrid, not every event has to be a hybrid event. You don't have to go and do hybrid for every event. You need to pick the right event format to achieve your goals. And then even if you do decide that it needs to be hybrid, there's a sliding scale of, do you have to do a fully immersive virtual event and a fully immersive in-person event with overlap and tons of engagement between the two? No, you don't. You might have just one or two sessions that are live streamed with some interactivity for your virtual audience, and most of the event is in person. You might actually have, on the flip side, where most of your content is done virtually and you have an in-person networking event, regionally based. You might have a hub and spoke model where you have 3 different on-site locations and multiple virtual attendees. The models are a lot, and that's where I think a lot of people are getting confused and struggling with hybrid. But if you think about what are your goals and why are you doing hybrid, and kind of go through element by element by element to break it down, it makes hybrid a little bit less scary.
And Nick, I heard the term just a few months ago, asynchronous versus synchronous. Can you expand on what Julie just said regarding that?
Yeah, I mean, that's almost a different way of looking at hybrid meetings. So hybrid, we think always of virtual attendees and face-to-face attendees. Well, what if a hybrid is also, asynchronous? So I think that's a different way of looking at it. We actually had an event a couple weeks ago it was a global supplier day, and everything was pre-recorded and it was rolled out by time zone. And we did have live Q&A as part of that event, but basically 98% of the event was pre-recorded, and it was done on an asynchronous basis in each person's time zone. And I think that was a really successful and interesting way of looking at a hybrid event, is how do you make sure that the attendees are comfortable, for lack of a better term.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Great example. Let's move on to our next slide. I can't believe it. We've got just about 10 minutes left. So we've just got 2 slides to get through though. So Nick, you're a multinational company. You've got, places in each region of the world. Where does DSM fit on these scales? And, does it vary by region?
Yeah, absolutely varies. I would say it varies in two ways. It varies by event type, and it also varies where the attendees are coming from. So I think the simple meetings, which I love that term because I do think there's a huge difference in simple versus complex or events. Simple meetings are going to come back quickly and come back by country, intra-country or intra-regional. We're already seeing it in the US as an example within DSM, whereas our colleagues in Europe are a bit behind. And then also in APAC, things are coming back as well. So I think that's, we're not going to have any large global meetings where attendees are traveling in from all over the world for a while. But I think that's a reality that everyone is now prepared for and has been prepared for. And it's really, that's more of a government issue versus it being a corporate decision. So our hand is being forced there. So I do think if there are large conferences that are going to be happening, I think you'll see people gravitate toward those if they can attend. But I also think the ability for those conferences to either live stream or provide a hybrid attendee experience is also going to be really important for people that may not be able to physically be there.
So, and Julie, you've got Cvent Connect coming up in a few weeks, right? And
2 weeks.
I know. And typically you would have a fair contingency from Europe. So what is that looking like for the live? Because you're doing some virtual aspects as well, right?
Yes, definitely. Yep. So Cvent Connect is coming up just 2 weeks, August 1st through 4th. So in the midst of that, and it will be a hybrid event this year. We are definitely seeing less international travel and almost really not even encouraging or marketing the in-person event to our international clients and prospects. And we do usually have a Cvent Connect Europe. And so we are even more than normal going to be focusing on that regional extension of our event for the international audience. We do expect to have a lot of international attendance virtually. And to Nick's points about the asynchronous and time zones, we are doing some sessions for Cvent Connect in a few weeks, since it will be in Las Vegas, that are virtual only and virtual purposeful sessions at 8 a.m. Pacific time to be more friendly to some of our East Coast and European audience who might be tuning in while our in-person attendees are having breakfast. Or we also very much thought about the live stream time of our live stream sessions being at 1:30 Pacific time, so that we're still in working hours of US East Coast at 4:30 and still early evening should we have any European colleagues wanting to join. So it's very much a thought, but being that Cvent Connect is what I would consider more of the large conference, we are seeing that most of our the larger percentage of our attendees will be joining us virtually. So our own experience is reflecting the research that we had out there, and that the simple smaller events definitely coming back first, and those large user conferences being a good example of where it makes sense to do a hybrid event to capture the in-person interest but extend your reach through the virtual.
Got it. Excellent. Let's move on and spend the rest of our time on the next slide, because there are 2 different topics that I wanted to cover off on this. And one is who's deciding if it's safe to hold a meeting, and there's lots of conversation around reputational risk in addition to safety and security of all your attendees. But I also wanted to talk about the expanding SMM stakeholder system, because I think I will have to say that Nick used a great term that the tent is expanding, right? Yeah. So Nick, if you want to talk about those 2 points in either order, that would be great.
Yeah, so on the decision-making perspective, side of it, for us within DSM, we've got a global response team that's been engaged for the last, I would say, 15 months. And they're really the ones that are driving the decisions about what's allowed or what's preferred with regard to everything from opening our manufacturing facilities, our offices, travel, our hybrid working environment. So they're engaged in all that, and that team is comprised of folks from our safety and security group, our risk management group, manufacturing, business line management, and HR. So it's a very diverse group of who's making the decision about what's allowed. So in the US, as an example, we're back to the office officially as of the middle of this month with limited restrictions, which also means that we're traveling. So they've done a really good job of trying to our office structure with what's allowed in terms of travel and meetings. So there's not a lot of questions. It's pretty simple. And I think that's been really beneficial for, especially here in the US. I'm based here, so I'm more so focused on that. In Europe, it's been a bit more challenging, right? Because we've got a lot more governmental restrictions, whether it's cross-border commuting. So we're a Dutch company. We've got folks that live in Germany and Belgium that work in the Netherlands. And we've got folks that work in Switzerland that live in Germany or France. So there's been a lot of challenges there, and that's been a bit more complex. In terms of the bigger tent, what I do think has happened is because of our ability to pivot to virtual, we've now brought in new stakeholders into our SMM environment, whether that was in marketing, where before they really wanted to kind of do their own thing, and now they're the advocates of the SMM program because we've been able to show them the value of collaborating with regard to our back-end technologies and our customer-facing technologies. Or if it's other regions that we may not have deployed our SMM to, but because of virtual, we'll take advantage of the technologies that were in place. So definitely growing, making the tent bigger and having a larger group of stakeholders that are supportive and participative in our SMM program.
That's really interesting because the event marketing teams in most cases were very reluctant to come on board with the SMM. I completely agree, wanted to do their own thing, really concerned about, how the messages were looking in the marketplace. So, knowing that you are able to provide value added services that makes their job better. And I think also what we're seeing too is great data that we're able to share back, especially in the virtual world. And I think that's going to be something really interesting is, as we move back into the face-to-face, how can we have that wonderful depth of data that we were able to get virtually? Yeah. Julie, one of the questions I had, we've just got a few minutes left, but certainly you can add on to what Nick just said, but I was also curious, what are some of the different protocols that Cvent is having to employ for this upcoming meeting in Las Vegas?
Yeah, absolutely. So one thing just to add to what Nick said, and then I'll absolutely answer your question, but one of the things we've seen, not just in is it safe to hold a meeting, and for our own hybrid event, that decision went up to CEO level. So we're definitely, and legal is very involved, but the shift of events into the virtual world flagged so many boxes for IT. And now, in addition to, these stakeholders on who is safe, definitely agree with Nick on the involvement of marketing and SMM programs just accelerated tenfold, but also getting IT involved in these new systems. And really, understanding how event technology and event systems differ from each other, both, the SMM platforms compared to virtual platforms, or in the case of Cvent, that you have both in one technology. How is that different from anything else that you might have out there? And so really seeing IT getting involved more in meetings and events than we ever have before. So that's been an interesting trend as well in this expansive stakeholder group. As we think forward to, what we're thinking about for two weeks from now, Vegas is in an interesting place. Vegas, we're in the US, Vegas is fully opening up. But, there's the caution in the US right now about what is happening, right now with new variants or unvaccinated pockets of the population. So what we are doing is we're really making sure that we can cater to all comfort levels. We're going to have tags on name badges that say, are you open to handshakes? Are you fist bumps? Stay back, open to hugs, to kind of help allow for that interaction and let people realize, where they are for our seating spaces in sessions. We'll definitely have some that are, maybe a few more people to a table, and then other spaces that are smaller groups at tables. And so really trying to make sure that, we allow for all comfort levels within a single event, which Oh, our planners, I don't envy them right now. They are amazing miracle workers, and I know just working all hours of the night. And then there's me banging on their door, like, and then we need this for our live stream session. And I'm going to be joining our event virtually and virtually piped into some of the sessions and working with them on what does that mean and what are our tech checks and who's going to be in the room. So
Lots of things to
there's
consider.
a lot to consider, just both from the setup as well as then AV and technology.
Wow.
And I could talk about it forever, but if you want more on that, just come to our event in 2 weeks because it's
There you
free
go.
right now to sign up virtually.
Let's move on to our, that's awesome, Julie. Let's move on to our last slide because we are here at the end of our time. We just have a little recap here and thanks for joining us today. We really hope you gained a lot from our session. Thanks so much, Nick. Thanks so much, Julie. You really shared a lot of wonderful information. And join us at the Supplier Showcase next. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.